Hi, my name is Davie Ferraro, and I am a full-time staff member here at Asbury Theological Seminary, and I'm also a part-time student in the Theological Studies program. I'm from Tampa, Florida, and we relocated here in 2018.
My name is Davie Ferraro. I am a personal trainer here on staff at the fitness center, but I'm also a student, an MDiv student, and I'm coming into my last semester here at Asbury. And originally from Tampa, Florida, I moved here May 2nd of 2017.
Yeah, I remember it. Do you remember it?
Yeah, but I remember it probably, I'd like to share something different than probably what you're talking about.
Okay, so what I remember is being at work in the student center, and I remember you coming up to me with a text message from a fellow student and colleague of ours, Rob, and he said, "Hey man, something's happening in chapel. There's a couple students staying behind, and it's really sweet, and I think you need to get here as soon as you can." And I remember we looked at each other and we both had something on our calendar that day. Like I had work and you had a session. We couldn't leave right away, but our heart, we just wanted to get there. And as soon as we could break away, we did. It was probably, I think that message came in about like 1 o'clock.
It was at 2 o'clock.
2
I
o'clock.
had a 2 o'clock appointment.
And we didn't get there till about 3:30. But I remember getting that text, hearing about it, and then just getting there and not wanting to leave. What do you remember?
So mine, and this might shock a lot of people, my first hearing of the outpouring was probably in 2017 and 2018 when the Lord started giving us visions and dreams of Him pouring out His love in this particular city with cars packed, lawns flooded with people, even to the point of people knocking on our door looking for a place to stay. So I would say I heard about it first just through abiding in the Word and listening to the Lord, which then set us to do something that before the Lord moves in a profound way, He calls His people to pray. And that's just what we did. Robin and I got here in 2017 of May, and almost immediately we were having these visions and dreams and started meeting with individuals like Dr. Siemens and sharing these things. And then we just started doing, we walked this city several times just praying for the very things that we saw, that we encountered. And I mean, that led, from 2017 to Rob and my whole band coming together, groups, all-night prayer walks, going to every single church, going to Hughes, going and visiting churches in Nicholasville and Lexington, just to pray with leadership. And the Lord just kept unpacking that He was going to start pouring out His Spirit in this city. He gave us many signs in the natural, but of course He was speaking supernaturally through these signs because He had opened our ears, awakened our eyes to hear His voice, not just for Wilmore, but for His people, to truly come to know Him and to know His heart. So I would say this just hearing of it was, 6 years out, but I knew in January of 2023, the Lord on January 22nd said that there was going to be a 22-mile wide river, that He was going to flood this city with His presence. And there's so much history we have in journaling and abiding with the redoing of the water towers in the city, cleaning them from the inside out, also the outside of the water towers. Wilmore stands for uncultivated marsh, that He was going to come and cultivate these waters and stir these waters up. But we knew that it was going to be basically, people get really cautious about the word revival, and we've kind of transitioned into outpouring, but we knew that He was going to come and lay His head in this city. In particular,
That's a really cool story of the pillow on the sidewalk.
Yeah, I do. 2019, pre-COVID, everybody remembers COVID, there was a pillow on AU's campus.
On the sidewalk on Lexington Avenue.
And I remember seeing that pillow, and on the third day, just happened to be the third day, I finally started asking Lord, I stayed there for 3 days. Like, Lord, are you speaking something, through this? Because this is how He speaks to us. We see things in the natural, but we're also open to what He's speaking. And almost immediately the Lord answers and said, birds of the air have nests, foxes have dens, but the Son of Man has no place to lay His head. So we knew, okay, Lord, well, is there something that how do we join, how do we participate with You so that You come and rest and lay Your head in this city? So again, that was prayer. And COVID hit, and what happened is our prayer, actually this fervent prayer, this travailing prayer, it actually increased. So we started praying over Zoom. We started even meeting like 6 feet apart, just going at night and praying. So I would say all of that really intensified. But Robin, like when Robin said, when we first initially heard about it, I know that I was meeting with somebody, and in the class that particular day, it was the second day of class for us, because we started on the 7th, I think. And I just really sensed the Lord moving in some profound ways in people's lives that I was personally meeting with, but also like the Lord was giving us a sign. Even that particular day, February 8th, I had just had lunch with somebody who's pretty dear to my heart, and there was such a breakthrough in her life. And I walked into the bathroom after our meeting. This is at noon, so of course, this outpouring had already started. The Lord had already started doing this very thing. And there was a faucet just running, just flowing. And immediately, I just felt something within me. I was like, ooh, there's something going on. And I just thought it was something that had just happened with a friend of mine. And then right after that, Rob texts me. It's 2:00, I have a client. And he sends me what Robin said, this little snippet, basically that he thinks that he was seeing sparks of revival, that students had stayed behind and were praying. And as soon as I opened it up, again, that same feeling just kind of hit me, and I was like, oh man, there's something going on. Went down and trained my client. I was diligent in training my client as much as I wanted to pick up and leave. And I remember this very clearly. I came out right at 3:00, and as soon as I came out, Robin had her jacket on, and she had her phone in her hand, and she was like, let's go. So I was like, okay. And when we walked over there, I just had such a warmth within me. I mean, you could just feel the Spirit just kind of flowing. It was just like the Lord was just drawing us, into a well. And when we stepped in there, you could even see like a haze that was just kind of resting within the building. And I remember Zach Mearcreeves came up to me and he was like, Davie, what are you hearing? What are you sensing? And I just remember looking at him and I said, I just need a moment just to sit in this peace. And if I could explain what this felt like, it's like going to a lazy river at a water park, and you just kind of like ease into the lazy river, and the lazy river just kind of takes you around, and you just begin to lose all gravity. You just felt super light, and there was such a serene sense of peace, and just seeing people love each other. And it was really probably one of the first times I've stepped into a service and saw genuine love for one another. And just reminds me of, what Jesus said to his disciples, that others would know who they were by the way they love each other. And just the confessions and everything that came about. But that was the entryway of coming in to this outpouring.
And I remember now you had to go. You had to go back.
I did.
And I got to stay. And the part that I stayed for, at this point it was probably like maybe 30 students that were there, predominantly AU. Maybe it grew to about 50 by 5:00. And what was happening was just confession, like spoken confession, repentance towards relationships. Big one was like repentance for suicidal thoughts and the strongholds of that over student lives. And it was so genuine and so sweet. And we were debriefing because we wanted to come back that night. So it was like 5:00, we had to gather our things, do family life, and do we want to go back? And I was just telling him, like, babe, this is authentic. Mm-hmm. Like, this is a move of God. This is because people are sharing stuff that is so personal mm-hmm. that it would have to take the courage of God to stir that within them. And I said, I don't want to miss that. So I remember us like collecting ourselves and getting home, doing what we had to do, and getting back. And at that point, Wilmore proper, I would say, had found word of it. And it probably grew to 100, 200 at that point. And it was just Wilmore City people, like reconnecting authentically. And if there were lines in the sand, they were being crossed and ministered to. It was just a time of healing and reflection that first night, I think. Is that what you think?
It really was. I remember picking up, I think Emma had a function at school. Our daughter, she's 16, goes to West Jess. And I remember going and picking her up. No, it was youth group. Was it? Yeah. I think it was youth group. And I remember going and picking her up. And she's like, hey, I heard this through my friends. And I said, yep, we're going back. Mm-hmm. So it was just like, the Lord was just like, yep, this is where he's calling us. This is where, and we didn't know at the time, this is where our work is going to be for almost the next 2 weeks. So. Yeah.
And I remember one feeling I felt about it too that first day, that anticipation as we're crossing the street to go into Hughes for the very first time, mm-hmm. and just looking at each other and saying, is this what we've been praying for? Is this it? Yeah. Like 5 years of prayer. When Davy says we've prayed, like there was a meeting every week on Friday afternoon. We prayed. And that small band of 3 to 4 people grew to be about a group of 20, predominantly men and some women, who would meet in Estes Chapel and pray. And I was like, is this what we've been praying? Like, is God moving in the prayers that we've prayed? Is this it? And we had such anticipation and like excitement and joy over it. And kind of like, just almost is this too good to be true? Yeah. And then that, we'll talk more about that theme as we unfold our story, but he continually delivered on every single prayer that we had prayed in those 5 years. Mm-hmm. And it was a cool journey. Yeah.
So the question was, how are we involved in the outpouring? What was, I would say, our role within this outpouring in just being instruments of God's holy love and grace? And I would answer it this way. Jesus said, while it's still daylight, I must work. And I remember like the Lord just saying that on that day, because immediately it was like, all right, Lord, where do you want us? You know our giftings, you know our talents, you know our heart, and you've done this full work within us. How can we be instruments of this holy love and grace that's turned towards the other? And we found ourselves immediately just at the altar, and this is where we spent our time. This was our positioning. This is where the Lord just kind of planted us, and we have learned through the years of abiding and ministering together of how our giftings really don't fight, but they actually mesh together, because He's united us uniquely, but He's also united us to become one. So we know that together when we minister, we're just actually ministering as the person of Christ in and through us. So Robin has some gifts that I don't have, and I have some gifts that she doesn't have, but they overlap and they intertwine beautifully, especially when we recognize, like, all right, Lord, you're doing this. So in other words, I could be sensing something over somebody, that he's doing something or he's saying something, and Robin could be discerning something, and she could be speaking exactly into what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing. So it's really powerful. And for us, I would say it was just, it was so eye-opening to see people that we've never seen before in our life. And we don't know anything about these individuals. And the things that we would say and pray would just, it was almost as if Jesus was right there, just hugging on these individuals, pulling them into his heart, just where Jesus was, in the heart of the Father. And they had never encountered that love before. And there were several times that people would stop, like we're in the middle of praying, and people would stop and look at us and be like, how do you know this? How do you know this about me? So the Lord was really just putting his finger on some very intricate things in people's lives. And he was touching them in a way that they knew this wasn't just like, something that was happening. This was someone who was stepping in and who sees this individual. So it was pretty powerful. There's some we can go into stories about individuals and how the Lord worked and how beautiful his love was towards these individuals. And I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, we were called to the prayer altar, and we never felt called to leave that position. Yeah. So our day looked like we would get up between 4:30 and 5. We would be, our staff member roles. We would be students. We would go home, eat as quickly as we could, and get back to Hughes Auditorium. We were there no later than 7 p.m. every day, and would serve till 1 or 2 a.m. and rinse and repeat for the 15 days that we were there. And towards the end, we felt the Lord saying, okay, you have ministered in my strength, and if you're to continue past this, so you'd be ministering out of your own strength, and that's not what you need to do. So we stopped ministering at the altar maybe 3 or 4 days before the
21st.
revival came to a complete end. But he sustained us gracefully through that with energy and food and time to do everything well. But we were at that altar 6-7 hours a night, praying one after another individual. And just, it was such a blessing to serve in that way. It didn't feel, we were tired, physically, that's demanding, but we didn't ever feel burdened or like a heavy sense of duty. It was just a light calling that he placed on us. And it was such a blessing to serve his people in that way, to go before the Lord on their behalf and to unite in and belief, and hope for them. And that was my big takeaway. It was a river of love. People explain it that way. There was just such a thick, palpable feeling of God's love, but it was also his hope, like the inbreaking of his kingdom and like a renewal of, this is real. God is real, For people to experience that for the first time was such a privilege, to be eye to eye and face to face with those people. And that's something I'll never forget ever, that the Lord graced me with that. And who am I that he would grace me with that? So the question is, we hosted, did you host, more than being at Hughes Auditorium and participating in the actual events, but opening your home and hosting. And that's something that the Lord has really shown Davie and I in the past, is to be a student. So actually the work he's done in ourselves of not only proclaiming to follow him as a disciple out in public, but actually to do the hard work of being authentic and genuine in your own home and behind closed doors. And so that's when really the rubber meets the road, right? And where, if there's a side to you that maybe isn't so pretty, is going to come out. And so we've actually been very intentional in the season leading up to the outpouring, and now we see why we were intentional with it, about working on that area. And so we've had some long-term students stay with us, and we've been opening up our home. The Lord led us specifically to this home in Wilmore, showing us that it would be a house of hospitality and renewal for people, to find health, because that's our ministry, is to walk in the fullness of health. And so we purposefully planned that. And then when the outpouring came, like Davie mentioned earlier, one of the visions he's given us was that we would have complete strangers knocking on our door, because there would be such an influx of people coming into the city to seek the Lord. And it was towards the end of it, and we had people, there was Facebook groups going, do you remember? And text threads that we were on about getting matched with families coming in town. And so those were kind of, still spur of the moment, but kind of planned, somebody's arriving tomorrow, can you take them? It's this many people, this many. And we would say yes to all those. But towards the end of the outpouring, we got a random knock. Yeah. And I was like, he even delivered on the random knock of, I'm here in the city, I have nowhere to stay, can I stay with you tonight? So how we prepared a house for that was, we live with my parents during this time. My mom has a great gift for cooking and hospitality. My dad was the taxi driver for everybody coming in town. So my dad drove everybody. My mom cooked around the clock and did sheets. We had, 4 or 5 blow-up mattresses all throughout the house, plus extra beds. But at one point, what was our highest that we had one night? 16 or 18?
No, it was 22.
22 people in our house in one night.
Yeah.
And I think total, I don't think that's right. I think it's a little lower. I think we had 14 one night, but our total was 29 people total throughout the 2 weeks. But even, we had Norway. We had somebody from Norway. Yeah. How cool is that? But our first big family was from Colorado Springs, I think, all over the country, all over the world. It was awesome.
It was really cool in that too, because we'd come home, we'd be so tired, our alarm would go off, like Robin said, 4:30 or 5. And I'd go grab my Bible, my journal, and be in the office, but we had people sleeping in there. So I was like, well, I guess I'm just going to stay in the bedroom. Robin usually stays in the bedroom. That's her place. Mine is my office. But like the whole like morning, we're like tiptoeing around people, like trying to get out of our own house. And it wasn't like, oh, this isn't like an inconvenience for us. It was like, Lord, keep moving, keep sending, keep bringing. And I would say there was times even at our home, in particular, we had a family from Colorado that drove all day. It took them almost 24 hours to go from Colorado all the way to Wilmore, Kentucky. They get to our house like at 1 o'clock in the morning. And this, I mean, there was so much the Lord was doing. There was times we were so tired, and we'd get these phone calls, or they'd come in late, and I'd have these, like this scripture just resonating in my heart of like the man knocking on the man's door, and he's like, my family they're asleep, and you have all, and it's like, nope, you just fight that fleshly thing to just want to sleep. You just get up, you welcome them, just as Jesus would welcome them. But I remember with that particular family, we actually had dinner with them that night at our house, and they started asking us questions of, things. And of course, I'm backing up like 5-6 years and what the Lord had initiated in us and what he was already saying that he was going to do. And it was almost, and before I knew it, I was just sitting there, and all the people were just kind of sitting there looking at us. And Robin and I were just speaking into these individuals' lives who we didn't know. And I remember just like that one time that guy approached me that night. I saw him like in Hughes. He like came up to me and he goes, I want you to know that this is amazing. He said, but what you and your wife spoken to us, that's the reason why we came. So it's just like the Lord was using all these opportunities in every rich way to speak, what he wanted to speak to his people. And who knows, that could probably carry that individual on 30, 40 years in the ministry. It could also birth many other ministries out of what the Lord did in that particular person. And that's kind of how I say that's how we walk now. It's not about like what's the Lord doing in this present scene or this present tense. It's like pulling back and seeing with the eyes of Jesus, the one who was created before time, the one who died for us and is also coming back to restore everything. It's like this huge picture of like what we do now is actually making this massive kingdom impact. And that's why we're here. We're not at Asbury for our degrees. We're not at Asbury to get our names on a plaque. We're here because of the people that we're going to meet along the road and the people that are going to pour into us along the road. So, yeah.
I think like a best way to describe like the ministry of that would be Hughes was the epicenter, right? It's right like where God dropped the pebble that then the ripples in the pond are sent out. And so there's many homes that were in Wilmore, just like us, doing the same thing, ministering around the dinner table or, on blow-up mattresses at night because you can't sleep. That was a cool effect of the outpouring, is what was initiated in Hughes, people carried with them and they wanted to talk about it and dive deeper about it and try to wrap their heads around it of what's happening here. And that was one of the best highlights of hosting people in our house, was to get their perspective of like, well, what do you think? What context do you come from? Where, how do you guys worship where you live? And just talking about that was a lot of fun, I thought. I mean, when you ask the question, I immediately think about, it spread so quickly because of social media, right? And the power of technology, that the word was able to get out so quickly and people were able to respond and jump on it and experience it. So that's the great part of it. The downside of that is everybody on social media had an opinion about it and they weren't here. And so to that audience that is trying to decipher if what happened was authentic and real, I mean, it's the power of the testimony of those who were there, I think. And if this speaks to anybody, like, that was the most palpable feeling I've ever experienced of being in the Lord's presence. It was, if I can explain it. Yes, there was a lot of people who bring their stories and their heartache and their baggage into that room, and not everything's going to look pretty. But the way it was stewarded and the way that the Lord's presence was there, the way that the administration at the university handled it, the way that they had it student-led, the way that they didn't have a big production made out of it, it was as authentic of an experience as I could ever imagine. It to me felt like a small glimpse of heaven when we will be around the throne of God worshiping. That's how it felt to be in that room.
Yeah, and I would say too, that was probably the beautiful thing about it, and you'll probably hear testimonies of this, especially those who were eyewitnesses of what the Lord was doing. But our heart, when I say our heart, the church's heart and our heart individually and as a married couple is holiness unto the Lord. It's this, being separate, detachment from things and from material things, from secular things, from the world, but also turn to the other. And that's what Jesus did. He was fully separate in the holiest of majesty ways that you could ever imagine, but yet he was turned towards humanity. And it was the love of God that sent the Son. And that's what I felt was what we were encountering in Hughes. And that was the only phrase that you ever saw, the only written words you ever saw, from February 8th all the way to February 23rd was front and center in the smallest, words, holiness unto the Lord. It wasn't about a person. It wasn't about a personality. It was about a community that was open to receive Jesus for not who he was, but who he is and who he has always been. And I mean, the worship that, and I say this, the worship that Jesus was initiating, because he is the worship leader. And he was initiating just authentic worship that I remember one time we were tired. It was 1:00 in the morning. We're at Hughes. We've been praying from 7 to 1 and it felt like I was there for 30 minutes. But I remember just being so tired. And that's what it was. Like every night I'd look at Robin and be like, I'm done. Like I'm tired. I'm done. We need to go home. We need to rest. And for some reason, we just felt like we should go across the street to Estes. So we step into Estes, and I just kind of want to sit back. I really don't want to talk to anybody. I just want to sit back and soak in what is happening. And for 45 minutes, the congregation that we were in Estes, what was happening at Hughes, what was happening on the lawns, all you heard was, holy is the Lamb. And it went on for 45 minutes. And I remember just leaning, and I just sat there just soaking. I remember leaning over to Robin and just saying, I wonder if this is what heaven's like. It was just, holy is the Lamb. No musical instruments, just voices. And to me, it was just such unity, from Asbury University to Asbury Seminary to people from all over the world in between, just joining in with this one phrase, holy is the Lamb. So
Forgotten that, yeah.
It was so powerful.
Do you remember the one worship time?
Yeah,
I've been to a lot of concerts before.
I do.
I'm a music person.
We were praying
so
over a dude that had his Bible
we
in a yellow
were praying,
shirt. Yeah.
and the worship got so loud in Hughes, we had to stop praying because you couldn't hear. And you were in people's ears, like yelling, and we couldn't even hear. It was deafening, and it was voices. And we just stopped and paused and took it in, and it hit you. Like you physically went like this to hear the roar of the voices just crying out to God. Yeah. And I was like, you just teared up. You couldn't not help it. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah, I remember exactly what we were doing. I remember I was praying and I looked up and Robin had almost left the scene of what I was praying. And she was just kind of looking out, just enamored, and just, like Robin said, you could feel the roar inside you. We're University of Florida graduates, and the Swamp is loud. It's where the Gators play football. It is super loud. And I will say that moment had nothing on what we were encountering.
Yep. I feel like you're going to hit stronger on this, so I'm going to go first
and
express how I feel. So do I see the Lord continuing this work? Yes. I would say right after the revival or outpouring, there was a hunger, right? Yeah. People were seeking the Lord, and there was such a hunger. Of course, the farther you get removed from something in time, the less that you are diligent in continuing that. And so I would say it's more now like little bubbles that will pop up of remembering, the Lord is still at work. Don't forget he's still at work. But what I wanted to really hit on is when we talked about that pillow story, finding a pillow on the campus. And so Davy is a person who sees something and the Lord will speak through it. And so he picks up what he calls God paraphernalia and he puts it on a bookshelf at home. And so he has a whole bookshelf of random items that the Lord has told him to pick up, and he speaks to my husband that way, and he journals through it. And so we didn't pick up the soggy pillow, but the pillow did not surprise me when he told me the story behind that, about Jesus coming and laying his head in the city. Mm-hmm. And so what he has spoken to both of us after the end of the outpouring was he re-spoke that pillow scenario to us, and he said, that was me laying my head in the city. That was me being gentle and initiating a work. And next time, like, I am busy rolling up my sleeves, and we're going to do some deep work. And so right now, I think what's happening in these little bubbles that we hear, or what's happening maybe that's not out in public right now, is that deeper inner work on a personal level, within congregations, within relationships, within addictions. I think all of that is being stirred and worked on. And when he pours out his Spirit again, it's going to be him rolling up his sleeves and really getting down to the nitty-gritty of making disciples who make disciples, right?
Yeah. And I would say, that, Jesus, the Holy Spirit's referred to as a spirit of love. The fruit of the Spirit is love, and then should be a semicolon, and then everything else that flows after that. But the core of it is love. And love will make you do, not make you, but love will encourage you. It'll entice you to truly lay down your life, to lay it all out. And that's why I think what Jesus started, what the Father initiated before time, and what the Spirit is doing right now is He's pointing us to the person of Jesus. And that love will take us for the rest of our lives to places, to people, where He will do things that we never thought that we could ever ask or imagine, whether we see those things or not. And I would say that, as Robin said, that love, I believe, gets us to confess. We get all this stuff out of us for the sake of holiness, because Jesus wants to put His holiness, His work, what He can accomplish in an individual, in a man or a woman, a child, what He can only accomplish, out on display for people to see, so that they're like, oh, this is possible. Not only that, but Jesus has not only died for us, but He's been resurrected from the dead, and He calls us to walk as He's walked. So that's what I see, is like people truly being set free, and not set free to being entangled into some other form of slavery, but truly set free from all the ideologies, all the, even I would say, the concepts that have birthed from man and not from the Spirit of God, that He's truly going to set individuals free to fully follow Him wherever He goes. Even if it's in the middle of a war zone, that Jesus is going to completely leverage people through His love to step into places they never ever thought. And that's what I think that we'll see. And I would say that we haven't seen ascending come out of this. Yes, there's been a lot of people coming out and testifying, but we haven't truly seen what Jesus initiated on the 23rd, what He's done in the years past through individuals. And that's our heart, is, Lord, You said, all of You went to the cross, all of You raised from the grave. What part of me has not gone to the cross yet? What part of me are You calling to walk out in this resurrection life, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of how I feel, but the things that You're drawing me to? And if it's impossible for me, but it's possible for You, get me to that point so I can cross over from death and truly walk as life, as resurrection life. So I would say that, Wilmore was probably born again, but I think there's going to be a born again, again, and again, and again, as the Lord just continually refreshes us with His love and takes us beyond. So, and I've seen this, with meeting with students from Asbury who want to meet one-on-one, and the things that they're confessing to me, their hearts pouring out, the things that Jesus is saying to them. I'm like, oh my gosh, like this, like, Lord, You are moving, and You're not playing games. I mean, You are truly raising up, Your bride to be a spotless, a beautiful bride who dances in Your love and listens to Your Spirit and goes wherever You tell them to go. So I would say this is initiatory, what had just happened. And I would say we're ankle deep in this river of love. And He's beckoning us with his love to come deeper, to the point that we lose control of our own selfishness, our own pride, like all these things that we want to kind of hold on and control, so that he can fully move through us, so that he can actually minister through our own weaknesses. So that's what I think that he's doing.
I think you bring up a good point too, of a major theme of the outpouring, especially with the college generation, right? They really focus on high school, college students. That generation they have been missing authenticity, right?
Yes.
They're living in a social media world. Everything is fake, and so
Filters.
they got an authentic experience, and it drew them in like a moth to a flame. And so, like what you're mentioning about, we haven't been sent yet. There hasn't been technically a sending initiated by the Lord. I know that we stopped, the outpouring at a certain time and said, now send it elsewhere. But the sending of the Lord has not hit yet. Yeah. And I think it's because these moths that have been attracted to the flame are in a season of training. A lot of people changed their lives. Even second career folks have come back and said, I need to be grounded. What do I theologically think? What do I know about my faith? I've said I'm a follower, but do I know what that means? And they're going in and studying the Bible and doing small groups. And some of them started school, recommitted to coming to school. So there's this season of training where God is rolling up his sleeves and getting these people ready to be sent. This next generation of authentic leaders. I think there's a new movement in the church. It's going back to the grassroots of authenticity. And I'm excited to see that.
Yeah, and I would say too, there's, when you say I follow Jesus, or I'm a believer, or I'm a Christian, for a lot of people, particularly in the West, that could be something of head knowledge. I know of Jesus, and Jesus is going beneath the surface, and he's diving deep to the true person of who he's created, and this is the true self. In other words, all these false selves have been kind of feeding themselves with things of the world, but yet that's sin. And Jesus is putting his finger, he's like, I want the will to turn towards me. I want the soul, the spirit within to turn towards me. So the Spirit's at work doing a work in us, and he's giving birth to our spirit. And it's almost like people are coming alive for the first time. Their eyes are being opened, their ears are being unplugged, and they're hearing for the first time. And it's something they've never heard before, because it's not a message of hate. It's not a message of, you have to work harder or earn this. It's a work of, Jesus is asking me to do this, or he's coming alongside with me to do this. So, and our whole heart is, all the doing comes out of the being. And we have to figure out who we are as human beings as we sit before the Lord, as we listen, as we become little children, before we actually go out and try to do things for Jesus. So I would say that's what I'm seeing. And the world would stop in their consumeristic and secular gospels and listen to these people, because this isn't just a knowing of and speaking about Jesus' word. No, this is, I talk, I communicate, I have intimacy. There's a bond between me and Jesus. I experience his love, and I'm speaking from that place. That's where the will has completely turned, the Spirit has turned, and I'm walking, participating in the divine nature with Jesus. So that's what I want to see, because you can't put a price tag on that. You can't try to force that or make that with some man plan. This is something that's truly authentic, that only the Spirit of God can do. So that's why we're excited, because I really want to see the church come fully alive in health, physically, emotionally, spiritually. And again, like we've said before, just walking in the holy love of God and grace. And whatever happens, Jesus he's got it. So this whole question of what did you learn about this whole outpouring? And I would say day 4. It was day 4. I got in my office. We didn't have anybody staying in the office that day. So I get up in the morning and I go in my office and I just begin to weep, weep. And I was sobbing for a friend of ours who was very obedient to the Lord's Spirit, who was a seminary professor in Malaysia, and left Malaysia to come to Wilmore with one thing. I'm called to pray for revival. His name is Hong, H-O-N-G. And the reason why I spelled his name out is because when I first met him, I felt like the Lord was saying to him, heaven is open, now go. Hong, H-O-N-G. Hong looked like a foolish man in this city. He had cardboard box cut up on both sides of his back, and he had "Come Holy Spirit," "Revival is coming now," "Repent." And he was faithful. Every day at 4 o'clock, he would be in the student center reading, studying. He would pick up, he would go home, he would put on his cardboard or we would call God paraphernalia, and he would walk up and down Wilmore, and he would go all the way up to the president's house and all the way back. And if you saw this man, he would never see you because he was doing this the whole time. His eyes were fixed on Jesus, and he was a sign. As he carried signs, he was a sign to us of what it means to truly be obedient, to follow Jesus, regardless the cost. This guy fasted his way to where he got super thin, but Jesus was faithful. And I spent many hours in prayer with this man of God around a fire at my house, all night prayer walks. And that fourth day, when I got up in the morning, I just remember weeping because Hong had left and went to New York. He felt like the Lord had called him to New York, and he did. And Hong was in Malaysia, and just so happened that he got to come here on February 8th that night. And when I saw him, I was just like, oh my, of all the people who got to see what Jesus done and see these prayers that we've prayed out from the depths of our soul, just crying out to the Lord, Hong, you got to see it. And I remember just weeping like, Lord, you're so faithful. And then the Lord just spun it on me. And I remembered oh gosh, Lord, you saw this before the creation. You've been praying ever since the creation. Father, before you sent the Son 2,000 years ago, you've been praying for this, and it's been you all along. So I was so focused on Hong, the Lord just pulled it back and said, this is me. And it was just and I remember just shaking so hard, just so thankful for all the lives that he was going to touch and had touched up until that point, and the places that he was going to take them. And I would say this is what I learned. And through all the hard times in our marriage, all the things that he's brought us through in sickness and in health, when he tells us to do something that looks so crazy to the world, but yet to us it makes sense because the Spirit is uniting us to him, that he's faithful. That's who he is. He's faithful, especially coming into seminary, and which has been probably one of the hardest things for me as a non-academic, to put my head down, to have my face like flint towards obedience to the Lord, of what he's going to do with our marriage and how he's going to unite our giftings and how he's going to take us beyond what we could ever ask or imagine. I know that he's faithful, and we truly, I felt like in that whole season, this Lord has broken off this fear of the unknown. And he's done that because he's increased our faith. He's increased our unbelief to come to believe that Jesus is the way, he's the truth, and he's the resurrection life. And that's the God that we follow, and that's the God that lives within us. So who do we have to be, what and who do we have to be afraid of? If God is for us and every part of our lives is for him, what does it matter? So I would say his faithfulness has been put on display as a banner in our lives. And that's who we walk with. And we're just joining all these other saints that have come before us and prayed these same prayers. And Jesus just continually takes all those prayers and gathers those prayers up. Eugene Peterson read about this in his Reversed Thunder, his commentary on Revelation. And he pours those prayers back into the city because they won't return void. So his faithfulness is true. And that's our Jesus.